Derek Bennett, welcome to MythVision. What's up, man?
I've just been kind of wandering the earth and back and forth through it. That's what I've been up to.
Didn't
do that.
Satan do that?
Are you equivocating?
I'm not. That'd be a fallacy. But I would like to ask you on a serious note about your journey. We probably have a lot in common, not only with drug addiction, being addicts or alcoholics, however you want to paint us, but also with the God. Mm. And I wonder if we have an overlap in that and how we ended up becoming people who are no longer in this addictive behavior. And yet we also came to similar conclusions about God. So tell me, were you a Christian at one point?
I was a Christian as a child. My mother was very devout, and she would even read to me from an illustrated children's Bible during the evenings. And those are moments I still look back on and cherish. Those are precious memories. And I loved my mother very much. So as a child, I fully believed this stuff for sure. Jesus was my savior. But that really began to dissipate for me at a pretty young age.
What happened that made you start thinking?
So this is where it gets interesting. My mother and her family, that is her parents, my grandparents, and her sisters, they believed in something called physical salvation, right? What did this entail? They were basically Christian universalists, and that they believed that in the end, Christ would redeem every last living soul. That people may go to hell impermanently, but in the end, ultimately, everyone would be redeemed. And they took this a step further. They taught that to believe in Christ fully in this way, right, meant that basically what John 3:16 says, they took that quite literally, that he who believeth in me shall not die, but have everlasting life. That they literally believed that we would never physically die. So as a child, I actually had this sort of strange sense of immortality. Now, it was compartmentalized, right? No way was mom going to actually let us just frolic in the street and, in front of oncoming traffic. We weren't that crazy because it is compartmentalized. But we believed that we would never physically die as a result of believing Christ in fully in this way. And my dad was always pretty unsure about this, and we would kind of tug at his shirt and say, "Dad, why don't you believe this?" And he would just say, "I don't know. I'm not sure." But on his, he came down with lymphoma and a brain tumor. On his deathbed, he finally accepted it. He accepted the message of physical salvation. So Dad was saved. Dad was saved, and he would not die. Well, he dies, of course.
Yeah.
And so for me as a child, that kind of left me in a state of confusion. It was not this just snap moment overnight. I hate God and I'm,
Yeah.
fighting against this from now on forward. It was just more of a process. I clearly realized from a very young age that maybe not everything I was being told by my parents or my elders, yada, yada, yada. Maybe it wasn't quite on point, and I needed to seek out ultimately my own answers. Now, I understand this is not part of normative or orthodox Christianity. I get that. Because I can already hear the Christians saying, "Well, that's not what Christianity is really about. That's what it says." I get that. I'm saying, generally speaking, it taught me the lesson that perhaps not everything that we're told to believe is necessarily accurate, and that carries over across the board. So it was time to kind of seek out my own answers. But that, again, was a very, very years-long process.
Let's blast through these years if we can. And you're on a journey. What are some of the things you encountered before you've come to the conclusions you are today? We'll get to those conclusions, but what are some of the things you studied that led you down this path?
I think I was pretty much agnostic for the better part of my high school and college years. I remember getting into Carl Sagan. I loved the movie Contact that came out, I think, in 1997 with Matthew McConaughey and Jodie Foster, and how that explored some of these issues of science and religion. Read Sagan's work, such as his Billions and Billions, the book he wrote before he died, and found that incredibly enlightening. So agnostic, more or less. And then when I was in my early 20s, a close friend of mine from high school, he had pretty well been on the same page with me, it seemed, until he kind of converted to Christianity as a result of another one of our friends who was, I guess, a little more devout, kind of having impressed that upon him, I think. And so that told me, maybe I need to look into this a little bit more deeply. Maybe I really need to kind of search this out and figure out, you know what I mean? Because I thought he and I were kind of on the same page with this. Maybe there's something more to it. I should look into it. And I started off on the wrong foot. Started off bad because it wasn't long before I found sites like Truth Be Known by Acharya S. Right. And some of the parallels that she asserted, and her manner of doing comparative religion. And then, of course, reading Dan Brown's The Da Vinci Code. And I was impressed with this. I
want to make a note. I think it's interesting that when I deconverted, it was Manly P. Hall, it was esotericist, Acharya S., Zeitgeist, things like that caught my attention. I did not know the source material at all. So I'm listening to them, and they're like throwing this stuff around, and I'm going, this actually makes a lot of sense that, it's not like there's just one story out here and that's it. There was something about it that appealed, but you didn't really know when you start getting into critical scholarship further that they're like, no, they went too far and there's problems. But it didn't matter at the moment for me. That wasn't on my radar. This was better, made more sense, even if it was wrong, than what we were hearing before about a guy actually doing the things, walking on water, really raising the dead, ascending up into heaven, and finding out, hold on, there's other people who did stuff like this. Now they did it, they literally Xerox copied, trying to make it all like it's just a copy of the same exact thing over and over. There's a lot of reasons we could poke holes, but wouldn't you agree that overall there was something more appealing about that, making more sense? Yeah,
and I must say that I even before I found that silly Truth Be Known website, I already had my suspicions, and here's why. Because some of this is coming back to me just as we're talking about it. I do remember during my college days at Ball State, our instructor in Western civilization had mentioned in passing that Jesus' story might have been partially based on some other character. I don't, for the life of me, remember who he said that was, but I know it piqued my interest then, but I never really followed up with much of a inquiry into that. So I remembered that, and that stuck with me. And then, of course, I also just remember thinking about, because I had taken a course in high school called The History of Science and Man, which was kind of like a special elective that was taught away from campus. It was at a place called Signature School. And so we learned about ancient Egyptian and Greek and various other worldviews and mythologies. And I couldn't help but think, and this was before I even knew about any of these striking parallels that we talk about now, before I even knew about any of that stuff, it already occurred to me that, wait a minute. If you were to go back in time and approach these people, ancient Egyptians, ancient Greeks, and say, tell me about your myths, tell me about your mythologies, they would look at you and say, what? No, this happened. This happened to Hercules. This happened to Osiris or Horus. I was already that principle of analogy that we talk about, where it's, you don't really have any frame of reference for any of this stuff in the real world, but you do for this kind of fanciful, fantastical stuff in ancient myth and legend. Before I knew one iota about any of these striking parallels, it already occurred to me that aren't we pretty much going to be looked at in the same way one day? Aren't people going to look back at our beliefs and say, tell us about your mythology, about this Christ figure and so forth? And we'd be like, what are you talking about? No, this really happened. It was clear to me already that what was going on here.
So this brings up a different thing. I just thought of this during what you were saying, is that we're now having this freedom to explore, that you're not hearing this. The Christians aren't talking about this. It's like a taboo subject to not try and compare Jesus to other figures. And I remember in my research going, they don't ever talk about this. In fact, they laugh and scoff and want to just wave it away, like William Lane Craig did in his debate with Robert M. Price. They laugh, oh, this debunked a long time ago, like as if there is nothing to it. And when you hear that, it even becomes more apparent once you start exploring there is something to it, that the dishonesty is there. Or I would even go so far as to say purposeful ignorance, so that there's a special pleading. So we're journeying. You get through the Acharya stuff, you start exploring. Yeah. Like me, I would say we have a very common outlook on this. Yeah. Probably differences in how we interpreted things, but we're starting to go, hold on, did this even happen?
Right.
Could this not be allegory? Could this not be a mythology? Maybe celestial astrotheology plays a role, maybe. All of this stuff. And then what would you say happened?
So inquiring minds want to know, right? Like I couldn't just leave it at the Da Vinci Code and Acharya S. I had to know more. And that brings up, I think of Frank Turek and is it Norman Geisler, who wrote, I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist. I remember asking my friends on social media, just saying, I can think of so many other things that it takes more of, other than faith, to be an atheist. What are your thoughts, guys? And one of my friends, Ashley Ray, you deserve the credit if you're watching this, said inquisitiveness. Spot on. Spot on. It's not a matter of intelligence. A lot of these Christian apologists are highly intelligent, right? Intelligence isn't really that's not what really breaks the mold. It's inquisitiveness. It's a genuine desire to really want to know and understand what's going on here. Being a genuine truth seeker, which they scoff at, but I'm telling you, we're doing that, and many of them are not. So I had to know more. I wound up purchasing a book called Beyond the Da Vinci Code, which dispelled a lot of the errors, but also said how some of the stuff was perhaps in the ballpark. I wound up finding Robert M. Price's work and was just amazed by that. I also discovered apologetics pretty early on. James Patrick Holding and his site tectonics.org, where he basically deconstructed a lot of this nonsense from Acharya S and Zeitgeist and so forth. And I had to admit, he was making some valid points, and that was healthy for me to kind of wade through the nonsense and determine what was true and what was not. It was a process. And given that I did all of this independently as an autodidact, it was a much more circuitous route. But I think in the end, it was worth it. So Robert Price, Richard Carrier, of course, but because those were the loudest voices in the room at the time, right? But then I began to branch out, looked at the scholars they are citing, for instance, and then discovering more and more as time went on, finding your channel, Derek, and listening to some of these scholars and getting different points of view and taking into account what, someone like Bart Ehrman has to say contra, Price and Carrier. And in the process of time, what I've been able to do is take in a relatively broad view of various scholars working in these fields and distill or develop my own synthesis of ideas based on everything that I've learned from all of them. So interestingly enough, you'll find me sort of somewhere in the middle of what the mythicists are saying on the one hand and what the historicists and most critical scholars are saying on the other. And I didn't do that strategically. Like I didn't make a concerted effort to put myself in the middle. That's just naturally where I wound up.
It's weird that you say that. Like there is no you and me sit in the office, conspire how we're going to get here. I had no purpose. Like I had no purposeful direction. People can, try to say, well, the reasons you're doing this is the reasons doing that. You might even say, hey, you got a big YouTube channel. You might have a motivated reason to go to the historicist approach, right? You have all these scholars. Most of them are historicists. No, I'm actually listening to what's being said. And what I use is the analogy, while you call it synthesizing, I call it chew the meat, spit out the bone.
Yeah.
If I think something isn't digestible, I'm not saying it's not plausibly food in that analogy. I'm saying it looks like bone to me. So I'm going to chew the meat, what I think makes the most sense. And I have synthesized my own coming to this. There's a guy, right? If we're talking about the historicity, because we've been bringing up lots of mythicists and Jaria and all that. So there's a guy, but at the end of the day, I don't know. Like there's other routes. And if you don't have multiple possibilities in your mind as routes, whether you be whatever category you are as possibilities, I don't think we're being completely honest. And I say that to bring it back to the question of your journey coming out of Christianity. If we just took the Dan Brown, the Acharya full-on astrotheology and laid it next to, he really rose, he literally is alive forevermore, he ascended into heaven, he walked on water.
Which one's more ridiculous?
Which one's more ridiculous is the Christian fulfilled, really happening one. And even this one's wrong as can be in so many ways.
Yes.
This one, and that's why even when I thought this is absurd after looking back going, okay, I get it. That's wrong. Wow. Horus, December 25th, 12 disciples, he did this and that and all that. Come on. So there's things that they're making up in the sources, but it wasn't ridiculous to me.
Right. But what gets me about that too, as I look back, it's like, why? Why promulgate these false, unsubstantiated claims when there are so many valid ones? Why is anyone even wasting their time on unsubstantiated nonsense when there's good, valid historical stuff out there?
Yeah.
And it gives the whole field of comparative religion a black eye.
Yeah.
And I hate that. So I am adamant about getting it right. You don't hear me make a claim unless I know damn good and well that it's based on primary source texts and sound scholarship.
I'm with you.
You will not hear it from me otherwise.
I think that's the best thing we can do. And I understand, and this is important, we leave this for people watching. There are various voices of academia that have differing interpretations, but I bet you while they disagree, Mark S. Smith, let's just take him, for example, right? And let's say he's not big into the dying and rising God category, but we can name a few that are. If we actually had a conversation with him, he might go, look, I'm not a fan of the category, but are there gods who died and rose in their stories, mythological stories where they actually physically rose or this or that? Sure. I just don't care for the category as if there's some trope category where people are trying to mimic. Because he might say death is ubiquitous. Yeah. So if death is ubiquitous across all humanity, everyone's going to die. It is going to happen. You could be in America, a Native American in America, cut off from the rest of the world for 14,000 years, and in your mythos have some afterlife notion. Why? Humans psychologically experience their loved ones after they're dead, or everyone dies. What do we wish? That they didn't die. So now you have a god or a being or some representative in your myth where they come back to life or something. That wouldn't shock me at all. And it wouldn't need genealogy. It wouldn't a genealogical connection. It wouldn't need to be, they heard about it in the air. We experience things and our myths are portrayals of that experience. So I just want to say that there's so much here to explore. The least likely is the conclusion that I came out of. I was a fundamentalist, and I'm on this journey with you, D.
Yeah.
And I want people who are listening to you tell a brief little view of your story to subscribe to Atheologica. You're going to be bringing more of that source material. You're going to be bringing more of these conversations. We have so much in common. And anything else you want to say before we go?
You know me. I mean, I could go on for probably hours about this stuff, but I think this pretty well gets the gist of my story. I also know that there are going to be, because I deal with these people all the time now, the Christians who say, aha, so he had his suspicions already, and that's what guided him in this process. So he's biased. Look, number one, I think that those suspicions are darn well appropriate, given, again, the principle of analogy, which is something that they're not able to deal with it, honestly. They're not able to engage in intellectual honesty when dealing with this problem. They can't do it. I've seen them grapple with it, and they're just dropping the ball left and right. But at the same time, I always remain open to the possibility that maybe there's something more to, I give these apologist types, I lend them an ear. I let them have their day in court with me. And it's not my fault that at the end of the day, for everything they're tossing at the wall to see what sticks, it just doesn't stick. A lot of this stuff, and I agree with Richard Carey on this, a lot of this stuff, quite frankly, is just common sense. But you know what they say about common sense? It ain't all that common. It should be, though.